We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Heyam and Beis in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 95b. On the previous summer, there was a machlokas amoraim by pshia b'bailim. Let's say the shomer, he's negligent, but he's working together with the bailim. Do you have the patur of ba'al of imo? In that case, that the shomer would be pater. And the Gemara tried to bring a proof from the Mishnah, because the Mishnah only discusses shoel, so why doesn't it discuss shomer chinam? It must be that pshia b'bailim is actually chayiv. And the Gemara says that's no proof at all, because the Mishnah also does not discuss shomer sacher. Why does the Mishnah leave out shomer sacher? We know there's an exemption of ba'al of imo when it comes to shomer sacher. And the answer, the Gemara says, must be the Mishnah is only choosing to bring the cases which are written explicitly in the Torah. But the Asya Midrasha Lo Katani, we're not bringing cases that are learned from a drasha. When it comes to Shomer Sacher, for example, that's there. You don't have Ba'al of Imo written explicitly in the Torah. We derive it from Shoel, and that's why that's not written in the Mishnah, and therefore there is no proof from the fact that Shomer Chinam was left out of the Mishnah. Rashi explains Dechsiva Behedya Shoel Dechsib Be P'tur B'Bailim Behedya. Shoel, it says in the Torah, it says in the pasuk, the idea of the P'tur of Ba'al of Imo, Katani Masnisun B'Bailim Pater, so that's why the Mishnah has that case. But the Asya Midrasha, meaning Shar Shomer, when it comes to other Shomer besides Shoel, the Isbu P'tur Midrasha, where there the exemption is learned from a drasha, Lo Katani, so that's not brought in the Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Braisa, Sha'al Lo V'Sha'al Ba'ala Imo, if he borrows the animal and borrows the services of the owner with it, Sachra V'Sachar Ba'ala Imo, if he rents the animal and he hires the owner together with it, or Sha'al Lo V'Sachar Ba'ala Imo, let's say he borrows the animal and hires the owner, or Sachra V'Sha'al Ba'ala Imo, or let's say he rents the animal and he borrows the services of the owner. In all of these cases, Afal Pisha Bailim Osin Malacha B'Makom Acher, even though the owners are doing work in a different place, V'Mesa and it dies, Pater, there is an exemption. In these cases, there is an exemption of Ba'al of Imo. And Rashi explains, Hacha bebraisa garsinan sachra v'sachar ba'ala ima. The proper text is, again, he rents the animal and he hires the owner together with it. B'makom acher, and then the owner is working in a different place. Shalo b'makom hapar, meaning not in the same place where the cow is. Uvilvad shetei malachto shel shoel o shel socher. As long as the work he's doing is the work of the borrower or the work of the renter, you have the exemption of ba'al of imo. And the Gemara continues, Savrua, right now we think, Hamani Reb Yehudahi. Who's the author of this brisa? It's Reb Yehuda. Diyamar socher keshomer sacher dami. Reb Yehuda says that a socher is just like a shomer sacher. Again, we had a machlokas earlier. A renter, does he have the status of a shomer sacher, meaning that he'd be responsible for geneva v'aveda, or do we say a renter is really like a shomer chinam, and he's only responsible for pshia? And so right now we think that a socher is the same as a shomer sacher. V'ahai tana katani milsa da'asim midrasha. So then it comes out that this Tana is teaching something that is learned from a drasha, meaning to say socher, shomer sacher, that's all learned from drasha. Ve'ilu shomer chinam lo katani, yet the brisa does not bring the case of shomer chinam, so it sounds like ba'al of imo does not apply to shomer chinam. And the Gemara says, no, Hamani, who is the author of this brisa? Actually, Rabbi Meir. It's actually Rabbi Meir, damar socher keshomer chinam dami. Rabbi Meir says a socher is like a shomer chinam, v'tana shomer chinam v'uadin l'shomer sacher, and the brisa is bringing you essentially a case of shomer chinam, because a socher is like a shomer chinam, and therefore we teach the case of shomer chinam, and the same would be true by shomer sacher. If you want, I could say another answer. It's like Rabba Bar Avua flipped it around. In other words, we can flip around the shitas of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Vitani socher ketzad mishalim. The way that he learns is socher. How does a socher pay? Rabbi Meir omer kashomer sacher. Rabbi Meir says like a shomer sacher. Rabbi Yehuda omer kashomer chinam, and Rabbi Yehuda says like a shomer chinam. And then again, we could say that a socher is like a shomer chinam, but it is following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rashi explains, if you want, I could say another answer. If it's better for you that the stam brisa, the unattributed brisa, should be like Rabbi Yehuda rather than Rabbi Meir, so ukma shomer chinam Rabbi Yehuda, you could say it's shomer chinam and still say it's Rabbi Yehuda kemo demachlif Rabba Bar Avua, in the way that Rabba Bar Avua flipped around the machlokas tanoim. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Hamnuna says, Liolam hu chayiv, the shomer is always chayiv, ad shetei parav v'choresh ba, unless it's, let's say, a cow, and the owner is plowing with it. That's the kind of work that the owner has to be doing. Or chamor or mechamer acharea, the owner is actually driving the donkey. Only in those situations do we have the exemption of ba'al of imo. And furthermore, v'ad shiu baila mishas she'ela ad shas shavura umesa, the owners have to be working with the shomer from the time of the borrowing until the time of the actual injury. injury or death of the animal. And Rashi explains, Liolam hu chayev ve'afilu ba'alav imo. The shomer is always going to be chayev even if the owner is working with him, ad sheyehi behema u'bailim b'malacha achas, until you have a situation where the animal and the owners are doing the same work. Kagon in parahi yehi abal choresh b'paraso letzorach shol b'sadeu. For example, if it's a cow, the owner has to be plowing with that cow for the borrower in his field. Oim chamor, or let's say it's a donkey, hey bolav mechamer acharav, the owner has to be driving that donkey. That's the only way you have the exemption. And again, furthermore, you only have the exemption if the owners are working with the shoel from the time of the borrowing until the time of the accident. Alma, we see kasavar that Rav Hamnuna holds, ba'alav imo akula milsa mashma, that ba'alav imo is going on the entire thing, meaning the entire period of the borrowing from the time the animal is borrowed until the injury or death. And the Gemara continues, Meisiv Rava asks a question from the Brisa we had above, Shala v'shal bola, ima sachar v'sachar bola, ima sachar v'shal bola, ima shala v'sachar bola, ima afal pisha bailam osin malacha b'makam acher. It said in this Brisa, again, let's say he borrows the animal and borrows the owner along with it, or rents the animal and hires the owner, etc. All of the various cases, if the owner, even if the owner is working b'makam acher in a different location, says the Brisa, v'meisa and the animal dies, potter, we have the exemption of ba'alav imo. So it says over here, the owner can be working in a different place. My lav, is it not? B'malacha acheres. It means to say that the owner can be doing different work for the shoel. He doesn't have to be working with this animal. And the Gemara says, lo, no, biosa malach. It actually means in a different place, but doing the same work that the animal is doing. The Gemara says, ela mai makam acher. But if that's the case, what does that mean in a different place? How are you in a different place and doing the same work as the animal? And the Gemara explains, the kamarpi viazal kamo. Let's say the animal is plowing, so the owner is going ahead and softening the earth before it, so he's in a different location, but still he has to be engaged in the same work. That's how Rav Hamnuna is going to explain this brisa. But the Gemara still continues, V'amida seifa al gaba have a reisha b'malacha acheres. But if you look at the end of this brisa, it talks about the fact that the owner is working right there alongside the animal. That implies that the earlier part of the brisa is talking about a different kind of work. The katani seifa, because it says at the end of the brisa, shal lo v'achar kach shal ba'oleh. Let's say you have a case where, again, you borrow the animal, but then you borrow the services of the owner only after borrowing the animal. There you don't have the exemption of ba'alav imo. Similarly, sachar v'achar kach sachar ba'alav imo. Let's say he rents the animal and he rents the owner. After that, he rents his services. Aval pisha habaylim chorshen al gabo. So there it says, even if the owners are plowing right alongside, right on the animal, v'meis and it dies, chayiv, he's still going to say chayiv, because that's not called ba'alav imo, because the hiring of the owner or the borrowing of the services of the owner took place after the borrowing or the renting of the animal. So the Gemara means to say from this, if the Seifa is talking specifically about al gabo, you're working alongside it, the Reish is probably talking about a different kind of work. The Gemara says not necessarily. Amri, they answer, Reish of a Seifa ba'osa malacha. Really, the beginning of the Brisa and the end of the Brisa is all talking about doing the same work as the animal. The Reish ribusa kamashmulan, the Seifa ribusa kamashmulan, and the Reish is teaching us a chiddush, and the Seifa is teaching us a chiddush. Reish ribusa kamashmulan, the beginning of the Brisa is teaching the following chiddush: the alfagav de lav al gabo ela ba'osa malacha. Even though he's not working right on the animal, right alongside the animal, but just doing the same work, kaven to have a bailam b'shas she'ela pater, since the owner was working for the shoel at the time of the borrowing, therefore we have the exemption of ba'alav imo when we say pater. V'sefer ribusa kamashmulan, in the end of the Brisa is also teaching a chiddush. The afagav di al gaba, even though the work he's doing is really right alongside the animal, on the animal, kaven de lo hayu bailam b'shas she'ela, since the owner wasn't working for the shoel at the time of the borrowing, chayiv, we say chayiv. But the Gemara is still not satisfied. Hi, my, what kind of answer is this to say that they're both talking about the same work? Now, if you said that the beginning of the Brisa was talking about the owner doing different work, and the end of the Brisa was talking about the same work, so hainu ribusa, that would make sense to have a chiddush, that we say that if it's b'malacha acheres, it's still an exemption, as long as the owner is working for the shoel at the time of the borrowing, and if it is osa malacha, it's still not an exemption if the owner was hired or the owner was providing services after the time of the borrowing. But if you say that the reish and the seifa, the owner is always doing the same work as the animal, so my ribusa, so what's really the chiddush? Who cares where exactly the owner is? They're both doing the same work. Why would you have to phrase that in different fashions in the reisha and the seifa? That wouldn't make sense. And the Gemara continues with more questions on Rav Hamnuna. V'yotanya, furthermore, we learned in the following brisa. The brisa says, "Mimashma shenamar in ba'alav imo lo yishalim." Once the pasuk pasuk already says that if the owners are with the shoel, so then the shoel doesn't pay. Any odeya shembol of ein imo shalim yishalim. Don't I already know that if the owners are not with the shoel, then the shoel does have to pay? That's obvious. Elamata malomar bol of ein imo. So why does the pasuk have to say it in both directions? That if the owner is with him, don't pay, and if the owner is not with him, you do pay. Lomar loch, it's to tell you haya imo b'shas she'ela, that the key is that he has to be with him at the time of the borrowing. If he's with him at the time of the borrowing, ein sarach lios imo b'shas shvuro umesa, he doesn't need to be working with him at the time that the animal is actually injured or dies. Haya imo b'shas shvuro umesa. Now, if he is with him at the time that the animal is injured or dies, that's not enough. Tzarach lios imo b'shas she'ela. The requirement is that the owner needs to be working for the shoel at the time of the borrowing. That goes against Rav Hamnuna, because Rav Hamnuna said the owner has to be with the shoel the entire time. And we have another brayso that says, "Mimashma shenemar b'ol of ein imo shalim yishalim," just in the other direction. From the fact that it says that the owner is not with him, then he pays. Eini odeh shem b'ol of imo lo yishalim. Don't I know that if the owners are with him, then he doesn't pay? Elamata amad im b'ol of imo. So why does it say that if the owners are with him, then in that case he doesn't pay? Lomar lach, it's to say to you, kevan sheyotzim mirishus mashil shah achas b'bailim. Once it leaves the rishus of the lender for one moment with the owners, meaning at the time of the borrowing, v'mesa, and then it dies, potter, then we say potter. Again, the same basic idea that the owner does not have to be with him the entire time. To yufta de Rav Hamnuna, to yufta, this is a refutation of Rav Hamnuna, and the Gemara says indeed this is a refutation of Rav Hamnuna. And Rashi explains to Yufta de Rav Hamnuna, this is a refutation of Rav Hamnuna, b'tarvayu milse, meaning in both of the things that Rav Hamnuna said, b'mai damar osa malacha b'idon, Rav Hamnuna said it has to be the same work as the animal, osvina mi braysa kamaisa, so that we're asking from the first braysa, to katani afa bisha bailam osin b'makam acher, because there it says that the owners can be working in a different location, and the Gemara said it doesn't make sense to say in the end that it's a different location but the same work. It means to say it could be different work. Uva mai damar achetei imo b'shas shavura, also Rav Hamnuna said that the owner has to be with him from the time of the borrowing all the way to the time where it gets injured. So that's a refutation from this brisa that really the owner only has to be with the shoel at the time of the borrowing. And the Gemara continues, Abaya savar like Rabbi Yoshia, Mataritz l'kroy Rabbi Yoshia. Abaya holds like Rabbi Yoshia, and he explains the psukim like Rabbi Yoshia. And Rava savar like Rabbi Yonasan, and Mataritz l'kroy Rabbi Yonasan. Rava holds like Rabbi Yonasan, and he explains the psukim like Rabbi Yonasan. This is a reference to the machlokes Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan we had before. When a pasuk lists two things, do we automatically divide them separately? That's what Rabbi Yonasan says. So, for example, when it says you can't curse your father and mother, Rabbi Yonasan understands that to mean you can't curse your father or your mother. It's either or. It doesn't mean you can't curse both your father and your mother. That's how Rabbi Yonasan learns. Rabbi Yoshia says no. It's only because of a drasha that we understand that. But without the drasha, we would actually assume that you have to curse both your father and your mother. We would actually combine the psukim automatically, unless we can darshan otherwise. That was the machlokas before between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan. And so we're applying that over here because you have two moments over here in terms of Ba'al of Imo. You have the moment of She'ela and you have the moment of Shvuro Mesa. You have the moment of the borrowing and the moment of the actual injury or death. So the question is, do the owners have to be present working with the shoel at both of those points in time, or only at one of those points in time? And we're saying that it's only at one of those points in time. And so the point over here is that Abaya holds like Rabbi Yoshia and he understands it through Rabbi Yoshia's lens, and Rava holds like Rabbi Yonasan and understands it through Rabbi Yonasan's lens as follows. Abaya savar like Rabbi Yoshia. Abaya holds like Rabbi Yoshia. Mataritz l'kroy Rabbi Yoshia. He understands the psukim like Rabbi Yoshia. Again, Rabbi Yoshia is the one who says generally we put things together. But all of ein imo shalim yishalim. So let's look at the part of the pasuk which says that the owner is not with him, and then the shoel has to pay. And the point is taima delesa b'tarvayo. The reason why he has to pay is because the owner is not with him by both of them. Ha'ise b'chada v'lesa b'chada. As long as the owner is present by one of them, so then potter. So then that's an exemption. That's how Abaya understands. Meaning to say, Abaya focuses on the pasuk which says that the shoel is chayiv when the owner is not present, and we automatically put together both points in time. He's not present at both points in time, but if he is present at one of the points in time, that is enough for an exemption. But doesn't the pasuk say that if the owner is with him, then he doesn't pay? So time adisa petarvayo, that can imply the opposite, that if he's with him at both times, there's an exemption. That sounds like if he's only present at one of the 2 points in time, then the shoel has to pay, and so we understand that that to mean, Lomar Loch, that's to tell you that there's a specific point in time the owner has to be with the shoel. Haya imo b'shas she'ela, if he's with him at the moment of borrowing, eino tzarach lios imo b'shas shavuro mesa, he doesn't need to be with him at the time of the injury or death. Haya imo b'shas shavuro mesa, if he's with him at the time of the injury or death, tzarach lios imo b'shas she'ela, he does need to be with him at the time of the borrowing, meaning it's just that one point in time, the moment of borrowing, that is important. That's when we apply ba'al avimo with the exemption. And Rashi explains v'aksiv in ba'al avimo, but on the other hand, doesn't it say that if the owner is with him, then there's an exemption? And again, if you're going with Rabbi Yoshia, the mashmanami atarvayu, then it should have to be that he has to be by both of them. Yeshno bazu v'yeshno bazuhu delo mashalim. Only if the owner is present by both of them, by both at the time of the borrowing and the time of the injury or death, then we'll say that the shul doesn't pay. Ha'isei b'chadam yinayim mashalim. But if he's only present by one of them, apparently he would pay. And so ha'ketzat. So how is it going to work? Because now it seems to be a contradiction in terms of the inferences of the psukim according to Rabbi Yoshia. Al karchach yesh ban achas shepotraso v'yesh ban achas she'eno potraso. Must be that there's one moment where the exemption works and one moment where it doesn't work. Of course, it's the moment of she'ela where it works. Umayhi she'ela potraso schiras eno potraso. What is it? It's the moment of the borrowing which creates the exemption, and it shouldn't be schiras over here. The Mesoras Hashas says shavura. It's the time of the injury. That's not going to create the ptur. Well, kaman parach epachanon. Now the Gemara later will say, why not reverse it? How do you know that it's the moment of borrowing that is critical? Maybe it is the moment of injury that is critical, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tzadi Vav Amud Aleph.